Broadcast of this program is made possible in part by the South Carolina Farm Bureau, online at scfb.org, and by the Columbia Metropolitan Airport, online at columbiaairport.com, and by Time Warner Cable, online at timewarnercable.com.
And welcome back to This Week at the State House as the General Assembly continues moving through the session of the General Assembly. Budget's passed in the House, it's over in the Senate. Senate Finance Committee will have to put its stamp on it. In the meantime, the Senate is dealing with different issues. Early voting is now past the South Carolina Senate. It's going to the South Carolina House. Another issue, though, that is bubbling around in both, it's passed in one form in the Senate. It's source of controversy, and with state airplanes and everything else is boiled over in the House of Representatives. And we're going to deal with that today. Nullification, what is it? Historically, contemporary? Why is it being debated in the General Assembly? And one of the ideas here is to kind of give you both sides of an issue so you can see why something becomes controversial. But before we begin today's program, I want to, of course, thank the South Carolina Educational Television Network for the production of this broadcast. And we want to thank our sponsors, Time Warner Cable, the Columbia Metropolitan Airport, and of course the Farm Bureau for the sponsorship of this program. And we appreciate the help that we get in putting the program together from the South Carolina Press Association. I would also be remiss if I did not welcome, of course, the friends from 518 of the Block Building, Zachary and Associates, Representative Maryland, Stavernakis, all of them have gathered around, find this show so informative. We're delighted to provide that service to them. So
certain things never get old.
That's right. And I want them to know we archive this program so they can go back and view it again. Let me introduce my guest today, because this is an interesting thing, and I really appreciate both of them coming on here to deal with this. And I'll first start with Senator Creighton Coleman, Fairfield, and you have York.
Chester and part of York County.
You're all over the countryside.
That's
there,
right, big district.
He's here with us to discuss it, and he's going to be giving his view on it. He's a member of the Democrat Party. Right next to him, Senator Tom Davis, comes from us from Beaufort. Senator, I think your district's wholly in Beaufort, or?
Actually, we're creeping into Jasper, so we're metastasizing into the rural part of South Carolina as well.
All right, he's a Republican.
That's a good thing to get into rural South Carolina.
It is, and I'm proud to do that.
Get there with the real people.
I'm proud to do that.
Let me start out before we go to the main bill. Nullification. What, in your viewpoint, is the issue of nullification? I'll start with you, Senator Coleman.
I don't really question the constitutionality of it, but I think it has to be very selected in when you try to do it. In this particular case, I think my friend Tom Davis, they are trying to nullify an issue that I think that Congress had passed as a result of 9/11 and was a good bill. The Senate up there voted 98-0 for it. The House passed it. George Bush signed it into law, and they're trying to nullify the president's authority to be able to deal with Taliban and people who are at war with America. And I think that's, in my opinion, not right.
Senator Davis, sure.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with his notion that nullification is something that ought to be used selectively and specifically. I mean, there are certain issues that rise to that level and some don't. I would take issue in regard to what S92 does. I mean, what it says is that it stands for the long-standing notion that states aren't simply political subdivisions of the federal government. And we have a Supreme Court case, United States, right on point, the Prinz case, P-R-I-N-Z, that was handed down in 1997, that said the federal government can pass laws, but the state is not obliged to spend money, issue its treasurer, or time, and employees to enforce them. And that's a long-standing principle. And so that's why you see states across the nation, Virginia, Michigan, Arizona, a dozen others right now, simply saying that, okay, if the federal government says that we're going to hold a U.S. citizen without a trial, without the right to confront their accuser, without an attorney, that state employees and state agencies cannot be compelled to enforce that law. I mean, so the S-92 doesn't say that the state's going to rise up in arms and kind of take on any federal official that attempts to enforce that law. But what S-92 does say is that states are sovereign entities. They're not merely political subdivisions of the federal government. And when certain things are being violated in the state's opinion, in this case civil liberties, the due process of law, that the state cannot be compelled to spend its money and direct its own employees to follow or discharge that federal law. So it's a very narrow application of the nullification principle, which is really just simply an expression of the overriding theme of our constitutional republic, that we're comprised of two levels. We have the states, who delegated limited powers to the federal government, and that the 10th Amendment, the states reserved unto themselves and the people respectively any powers that weren't delegated to the federal government. So whenever you have a division of power like that, inherent in that structure is the right for the state to look at what the federal government does and to decide for itself whether or not it's acted beyond its authority. And in cases where they do think it's acted beyond its authority, the U.S. Supreme Court has said it's perfectly legitimate for the state to say, we're not going to spend our money or direct our agencies to enforce that law. So there's nothing controversial about this law or this bill. That's why you see it passing almost unanimously on a bipartisan basis in houses throughout the nation. So yes, I think that S-92 is a good piece of legislation, and it stands for this notion that we're a federalist republic and the states play a role. They simply don't salute and do whatever the federal government says.
Let me respond to that, if I may.
Go ahead.
With the concept, I agree with the concept of it, but let's be very clear with regard to S-92. What it says that our local state employees or county employees, for instance, somebody working in a detention facility in Fairfield County, Chester County, or York County, that they cannot cooperate with the armed forces of the United States. That's what it says. And cannot cooperate in detention of any citizen of the United States pursuant to this National Defense Authorization Act. So to me, you're telling state employees or county employees, for example, if the CIA comes in here and arrests somebody and they need to have a temporary facility to place a Taliban person in America somewhere, that a state employee can't cooperate with them?
What you're saying is, and again, you're making a legal conclusion before the fact. I mean, somebody's a Taliban cooperator after a court of law determines that's what they're doing. I mean,
I'm talking about before the court of law does that. I'm talking about holding him pending trial.
Yeah, well, and that's
before bond is set. You're saying in this bill that you can't, that a state or county employee cannot cooperate with the armed forces of the United States. And to me, that's why I say
in instances where the armed forces of the United States are indefinitely detaining an American citizen without affording certain due process rights in violation of the South Carolina Constitution. You have to read the entire bill. And let me just say this. Sometimes the noble thing to do is to disregard a federal law. The states before the Civil War that refused to enforce the fugitive slave laws were acting nobly. Rosa Parks, when she went ahead and in civil disobedience refused to abide by a segregationist decree, was acting nobly. I mean, if you want to go international basis, those in Nazi Germany that were hiding Jews and saving them from the state, I mean, that was illegal, but they were acting nobly. There are certain times in history and certain times when the noble thing to do isn't necessarily what the central government says to do. And I want to be on the right side of history. When we have a case where the federal government says it's okay to take a U.S. citizen before they're tried, before they have a chance to be heard, and indefinitely detain them and deny them habeas corpus, the right to an attorney, the right to a trial by jury, the right to appear before a judge, I think that's wrong. And I want to be on the right side of history and not just simply do whatever the federal government says we ought to do.
Well, let me ask you this. I've got a copy of the bill here, the U.S. bill. Now, the way I read this, U.S. citizens are excluded from, they are not a covered person
for certain things. For certain things. When you read that exclusion, it relates to habeas corpus. It says that in regard to habeas corpus, it does not apply to U.S. citizens. It does not say, and Rand Paul made this point during his filibuster, that NDAA does say that American citizens have to be provided habeas corpus and excludes them. It does not say they have a right to trial by jury. It does not say they have the right to an attorney. It does not say they have the right to confront their accuser. I mean, so as Rand Paul said, you can't cherry pick the Bill of Rights. You can't simply say, well, okay, if you're a U.S. citizen, we're going to give you the right to habeas corpus, but deny the rights that are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights in other areas.
Well, I mean, here it is right here, the law. It says that covered people are not U.S. citizens.
In regard to indefinite detention.
Okay.
So, do you think the law is constitutional?
I think it's questionable. I mean, I go back to the theory that we need to cherry pick when we trying to nullify something. And I think in this particular case, to dictate to state employees, county employees not to cooperate with the armed forces of America is wrong.
It doesn't say anything about not cooperating. What it says is that state agencies are not going to spend money or utilize their employees to enforce a federal law. And again, that is established constitutional jurisprudence. I mean, the Supreme Court of the United States said in the Prince case that states are sovereign entities. They're not merely political subdivisions of the federal government to carry out their will. So, you know, what we're talking about here in S-92 is nothing groundbreaking. And again, that's why you're seeing Lieutenant Governor McConnell, that's why you're seeing on a bipartisan basis almost unanimously in states throughout the nation saying, yeah, I mean, states aren't political subdivisions. The federal government can't tell us to spend money and enforce their laws. Doesn't mean we're going to stand in their way. It doesn't mean we're going to, you know, go ahead and deny them to enforce the laws using their money and their employees. But this is a very mainstream kind of thing to do. And it really surprises me that the Democratic Party, which has long stood for civil liberties, which has long been suspicious, I think, of interference with individual rights, would be opposed to the notion that if an American citizen is suspected of terrorist activities, that American citizen shouldn't be afforded the usual due process rights, whether it's habeas corpus, the right to an attorney, the right to confront the accuser. I mean, these are bedrock principles of constitutional law. And again, the noble thing to do at certain points in our history has always been to, quote, break the law, unquote, if it takes that. Rosa Parks broke the law. The states before the Civil War that refused to, you know, return captured slaves to the southern states, they broke the law. Again, those in Nazi Germany that were harboring Jews, you know, so they didn't go to the gas chambers, they were breaking the law. Sometimes there is a higher moral law that you have to follow. And if we become so legalistic and thinking that, well, you know, the federal government passed this law and Congress says we should do this, and therefore I think maybe we have to do it, you get yourself in that legalistic box. You lose yourself as a human being. You lose yourself in looking at, is this just, is this right? I don't want to be a nation like that.
Sometimes I think I didn't read the same bill that my good friend Mr. Davis read, but I'm quoting it right here where it says that no agency of the state may engage in an activity that aids an agency of the armed forces of the United States in execution of 50 U.S.C. 1541 as provided by the National Defense Authorization Act. That tells me that a state agency, a state individuals can't cooperate with the federal government in the execution of that.
I agree with that. We're not going to spend our money. We're not going to have the state taxpayers. We're not going to have state agencies go ahead and participate in a federal law that is going to violate individuals and citizens of due process rights. I mean, that's exactly what it says. And it's modeled after what was passed in Virginia. Other states have modeled after what we're doing here. Again, it's being passed almost unanimously on a bipartisan basis throughout the country. I'm not sure what's different about the South Carolina Senate, but apparently they've decided to make it a partisan Republican and Democrat issue. It's not. It's an issue of whether or not the state can be compelled as a political subdivision of the federal government to fulfill whatever Congress wants them to do. And I just think that, I think that, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that's not right.
And so we disagree.
We disagree. We do.
All right, well, let me ask the two of y'all so that our viewers will know. Y'all pretty easy to have on the show because y'all pretty much can get right in there and argue the issues. One of the things is, so what we're talking about are two different concepts of nullification. The nullification in the 19th century was where the state said, it's just unconstitutional, we're not going to have anything to do with it. All right, in the 20th century, in the 21st century, you're telling me there's a court case out there which says that the Supreme Court has said, regardless of the 14th Amendment and everything, a state is a sovereign entity, and if the federal government wants to do something that's within its jurisdiction, it can't compel the state to spend its money and order its people to enforce that law. Is that what?
And that's what S92.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, and that's what S92 says, Lieutenant Governor McConnell. And you're right. Nullification can take many forms. I mean, it can take the form of civil disobedience. It can take the form of refusing to spend state treasure to enforce a federal law. It can be, you know, along the lines of what a Rosa Parks did and to bring something to the fore. It can be in regard to what Rand Paul did just last week in terms of a filibuster in the U.S. Senate. He didn't stop the CIA nominee from being confirmed, but what he did by taking that floor and by challenging federal authority and reminding people that states are sovereign entities and that they've reserved unto themselves certain rights and that the federal government is also restricted in regard to Bill of Rights guarantees to individuals, it sparked a conversation throughout this country. And so nullification is really, in my opinion, the name given to these various efforts made by individuals and states and cities to remind people that the federal government isn't omnipotent and that when Congress passes a law, that isn't the end of the matter, that there are other inquiries that should be made and it's healthy to be made.
Well, let me ask the two of you this because it came up in the debate, so I need to put it out there so the public can understand. Y'all got in an argument, didn't you, about whether or not this is important, whether you should take this up or shouldn't take this up. What's y'all's respective positions on that?
To me, I think we have more important things to be worried about in South Carolina. Our roads that are crumbling, education, the budget we have coming up that we need to make sure that is going to the right areas of our state, the seniors, and I mean, so what if this passed the House? It may pass. I mean, pass the Senate. It may got out of committee. I think yesterday, subcommittee in the House. Now, what will happen? I mean, what is the end goal with this? I mean, so it passes. So. It passes.
Well, I would simply say this, Lieutenant Governor McConnell, I think it's a false premise. I mean, I debated this for 35 minutes on the Senate floor and then sat down. 25 minutes later, it passed the Senate. I mean, so we're talking about 50 minutes of time, you know, in a body where senior legislators, quite frankly, Republicans and Democrats, want to adjourn at 4 and 5 o'clock every afternoon so they can go to a cocktail party or a fundraiser. I mean, so it's a false choice to say that debating this for 35 minutes and passing it is going to deny us the ability to get to roads or schools or health care. I mean, we all know better than that. I mean, just yesterday on the floor, I mean, we saw, you know, my good friend Senator Ford from Charleston go ahead and talk about pretty much anything under the sun for an hour and a half because they wanted to run the clock out and not get to another bill. So, you know, look, I mean, we can debate a bill on its merits, and that's fine, and you can vote against it if you think it's not important. But really, in terms of taking up the Senate's time, if you look at our work ethic, if you look at the senior senators that want to adjourn so they could get to Momo's or some restaurant like that for a fundraiser, I mean, this is really a tempest in a teapot. And, you know, and if it passes the House and is signed into law by Governor Haley, here's what you get. Yet another instance where a state has said we're simply not going to abide by and follow everything the federal government does, and we're certainly not going to spend our treasure on anything that Congress decides is important. It is a steady drip, 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 drip that's going on throughout the country, and the more we remind the people that we're a federal republic and certain powers reside with the people in the states, I think that's healthy.
My question, too, is this the first of other bills like this to come through?
I hope that it is. I mean, in every instance where I think the federal government has overstepped its bounds, in every instance where the federal government seeks to treat the states like political subdivisions to carry out this will, we ought to be in that body. Republicans and Democrats alike ought to be standing up for the people of South Carolina in that regard. I don't know what else is coming down the pike. NDAA and its violation of due process rights I think was important. I think that there may be an argument that the executive decree issued by President Obama restricting Second Amendment rights, that may be a topic. Whether or not the federal government can completely usurp health care and direct state agencies to fulfill its mandate, Obamacare nullification provision, I think that's a legitimate debate. I mean, I find it hard to believe that there's anything more important that we can be doing than debating where power properly resides in our constitutional republic, especially when we're looking at a federal government which now has a $16.7 trillion debt, trillion-dollar annual deficits, aggrandizing power unto itself on a daily basis. There isn't anything more important we can be doing than saying, halt.
Well, both of y'all certainly have a lot to say on this particular subject. Let me ask you, the issue of nullification has been bubbling over in the House, and now it's bubbled over into the issue of state airplanes. And there are allegations over there that a state airplane was used to bring a witness for a hearing. I know this is really about nullification, but I want to ask y'all, do y'all think that state airplanes, that's a good use of state airplanes?
No, and I think my good friend Senator Coleman and I would probably agree on this, that I think it's completely inappropriate, whether it's for nullification or any other bill, for a state lawmaker to utilize apparently the power to access a state airplane to bring in expert witnesses from around the country. I mean, I think that's wrong. It sets a bad precedent. You could potentially have 170 lawmakers, lining up trying to use a state plane to bring witnesses from around the country in to testify for their bill. I think that's an extremely poor practice and an extremely poor use of taxpayer dollars. I mean, so I can't defend that particular action over in the House.
I agree. I think, from what I understand, the witness was paid $6,500 as far as his fee to come down to testify. And then he was provided the state plane to come down too. So you figure he had a pretty good day coming down. So I'd imagine that the flight itself probably cost $3,500. So he probably got over $10,000 worth of value to him coming down. And I agree with Tom that I don't think, from my understanding, a witness appearing in a committee, a subcommittee, has ever used a state plane, from my understanding.
I frankly didn't realize that lawmakers had access to the state plane. I knew that certain executive branch agencies did, and I knew for economic development, recruiting, or whatever. I was frankly surprised that lawmakers had the ability to access the plane.
I mean, it should be for official state business.
So I guess my next question to you is, the issue's up. We're halfway through this session. Do the two of y'all see this issue now being addressed? The LAC did an audit on it and recommended that guidelines be put in place for the use of the state airplanes. Now the issue's back up. Will this General Assembly now have to codify? There's a proviso in it that says it's supposed to be used for official business, and it prohibits the use of it for press conferences and ceremony bill signings, I think. But it doesn't go beyond that. Do y'all see the General Assembly now trying to nail it down so this doesn't happen again?
I think we have to. I mean, I think that's part of our obligation to make it clear as to when it can be used and when it can't be used. I would say I have not seen that report that you just spoke of, but I think we need to, yes.
I would agree with Senator Coleman, and I think probably the proviso may not go far enough if it doesn't preclude bringing in witnesses to testify in regard to a particular piece of legislation. I mean, if it doesn't cover that, the ban or prohibition doesn't cover that, it should. So I think it's an excellent time. Senator Lurie talked about filing a bill. I look forward to looking at it, and I expect I'll be a co-sponsor of it. And I think it's going to be an instance where you see, both my friends in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party getting together and saying this isn't a good use of taxpayer dollars.
And I think one provision that we could do in that, if we can say that if somebody is found to have abused the state plane, then they have to pay for it. That way, that would be a deterrent.
So the taxpayer doesn't get stuck with the bill.
Exactly.
We just got a few minutes left in the broadcast. I want to go back to nullification and ask y'all to look into the future now. Over in the House, I believe they're dealing with a bill on nullification that deals with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Do you see that issue coming before this General Assembly? Or do you see it just staying in committee? Tell me what's y'all's prediction for the future, and do you think there's a viable issue there?
I think there is a viable issue there, and the question is whether or not it will get to the floor. I mean, I think it's going to probably start in the committees, and whether or not it will get stalled in the committees or make it on the floor, that's going to be the question. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with.
I think so. I think probably it's in the House right now, and it came out of committee, or did it go to full committee yesterday? I'm not sure the posture of that bill in the House, but it'll certainly be a House vehicle, I think. I mean, they've moved further along.
The nullification bill?
Yeah.
It came out of subcommittee. It's going to go toward full committee. Full judicial.
But yeah, it would be a House bill. I would think that because of the crossover deadline and because of Senate rules and the need to go through the process in the Senate, I think it would be problematic it being taken up this particular term. But I do think it's something that's going to continue, because there are certain times in history when something comes to the fore because the time is right. During the 50s and 60s, it was civil rights. I think right now, in the period we're in right now, a whole revisiting of where should power reside, how much power should the federal government have, what powers are reserved under the states and the people. I think that's going to be the defining issue of the next decade, quite frankly.
So let me ask you with that one, would it be in the perspective then, not so much of the historical nullification where they just say, this is unconstitutional because the U.S. Supreme Court has said it is constitutional. So will this be kind of what is this later doctrine of nullification, as I understand it, of just saying that the state can't be forced to spend money or something to
discharge? That's a component of it. I mean, I think, and again, I go back to my own interpretation. Nullification is sort of a word given to an overall effort, whether it's through civil disobedience, whether it's through, exercising rights under the Prince decision not to spend dollars to enforce a federal law, whether it's challenging federal laws in court. I mean, all of those things, in my opinion, represent efforts by states to push back against an overreaching federal government. And I assign to those group of activities the general term nullification. I mean, at least that's how I employ that term. Others may deal with it more legalistically or historically, but that's how I define it.
So there is some confusion about that word because of what occurred back in the 1800s.
There is.
And the adoption of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. But this is based upon, as I understand it, a U.S. Supreme Court case which just says, look, it's a federal law. You can't order the states to spend their money to enforce it. Is that essentially where this new debate has come to? So the viewers out there understand why this has raised its head here in the General Assembly. And
across the country, Lieutenant Governor McConnell, and other states as well. And so I think in South Carolina in particular, because we were the state that fired upon Fort Sumter and we were associated with secession, and people tend to conflate the words nullification and secession together. And so that's why I think you see a lot of sensitivity in South Carolina, and I understand that. But what we're talking about here is something much different than that.
And I think a part of it too is the budget, is our budget. We don't have the money to really push it into what the federal government wants. We have our own needs here in South Carolina, so that may be one reason too that this nullification issue may have percolated a little bit because of lack of funds.
Well,
that's a good point.
Speaking of a lack, of course, a lack of time, we're down to 2 minutes left in the broadcast. Let me just ask the two of you. Of course, the Senate's going on a 2-week break here. It'll be coming back, the budget shortly up the road. Do y'all see a sharp fight over this budget? Not enough money, too much spending, what? Very quickly, just give me your perspectives on that.
Well, from what I understand, we have more money than was anticipated when they estimated how much money was going to be budgeted. I understand we have about $170 million more. So the question is where that money is going to go. I mean, I hope we can, I've started talking to people about some cost of living increases for the state employees and that kind of stuff. So we have to see. I think there will be a lively debate on the budget.
I think that there's going to be, and I agree with my friend Senator Coleman, I think there's also going to be a renewed attempt to have the state opt in to expanded Medicaid coverage. I don't think that debate's over. I think the healthcare industry is lawyering up and lobbying up to get that money, and I suspect that'll raise its head during the Senate budget process.
Well, it's raised its head on this show. We've had some what I would call rather lively debate over the question of Medicaid. Yeah. And I, of course, would tell the two of you, I hope that the Senate and the House will look at the challenge of aging in this state, because we've had a 48% cut in that particular area, and we got seniors who are going mourning. And with that, we're going mourning for time. We've got to wrap it up. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week with different topics here this week at the State House.
Broadcast of this program is made possible in part by the South Carolina Farm Bureau, online at scfb.org, and by the Columbia Metropolitan Airport, online at columbiaairport.com, and by Time Warner Cable, online at timewarnercable.com.